been a whirlwind couple of weeks in American politics, and we will talk about landmark Supreme Court decisions and more with United States Senator Tammy Baldwin this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. For many in this country, years, if not decades, of hard work and uncertainty and promise were suddenly realized in 1 week. That must certainly be true for my guest this morning, Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin. And such is politics in our nation, right, Senator?
Absolutely.
It's really nice to see you again.
It's great to be here.
But isn't it amazing? I mean, just think of how long you've been working on health care reform in particular, to say nothing of marriage equity.
Right.
All of a sudden, in one fell swoop. Big
Absolutely.
week.
No, there's so much to celebrate. And in Wisconsin, with regard to the Affordable Care Act, it means that 166,000 people can now know that they will be able to keep their tax credits that help them pay for affordable and comprehensive health insurance, and not have to worry that that's just going to be, the rug pulled out from them. And what I hope is that ultimately this will mark a pivot in our politics, that we can stop having these politically motivated lawsuits like this one that the Supreme Court just decided, and stop having these repeated attempts to gut or repeal the Affordable Care Act, and now work together across the party line to, fix the things that do need fixing and move ahead, move forward.
So in both of these cases, looking forward, there has already been some conversation about let's not celebrate too soon. Gay, lesbian, transgendered are worried about continuing discrimination laws and things that we can't just pretend are gone for now. Attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act may be done, but still it's going to be a major topic of the presidential campaigns, right? What do we need to be looking for moving forward to get to the point, as you suggest, that we can focus on moving past this? Starting
with marriage equality, I first want to just acknowledge the joy I felt when I heard the Supreme Court decision. I've often said love is love, family is family, and discrimination against anyone's love or anyone's family is wrong. And now we have the United States Supreme Court saying it's also unconstitutional. But as you note, an individual can get married over a weekend, share that news with their friends and employer, and be fired by that evening, or be evicted in so many jurisdictions across this country. And so it's a huge milestone in the march to equality, but there is a long way still to go to address these other forms of discrimination. And the other thing I would note is just the tone of the reaction to both of these Supreme Court cases. Sort of defiant attitude of we're going to continue to try to gut the Affordable Care Act. We're going to continue to, try to erode the decision that the Supreme Court just made in terms of marriage equality.
Right. But there's a difference, isn't there, Senator, between what we're hearing politically and maybe what you're hearing around the state and what citizens in the country are saying? There's some concern. There's some genuine fear on behalf of others. We understand that. Whereas a lot of the political rhetoric is sort of this more angry, aggressive, we've got to fix this.
Right. Yes, the opinions of the American people have shifted very dramatically, actually on both of these issues. The number of people who now are calling on the Congress to work together to address the imperfections, and there are many, in our healthcare system, but stop this type of politics that calls for repeal or defunding of something that now millions of Americans and tens of thousands of Wisconsinites are relying upon. So American opinion has changed dramatically on that, as it has with the issue of marriage equality. What a swift and steady and consistent sort of change we've witnessed over the last decade, roughly. I do think that it makes it a little harder for these you know, political attacks. But unfortunately, I think there'll still be something we have to contend with for a while.
Yeah. I've heard many strong advocates for the Affordable Care Act and health reform in general admit that the Care Act is flawed, that there do need to be some fixes, and some we probably won't even see, you know, for years to come yet. However, right after the decision, Congressman Ryan said it is not fixable. You talk about fixing it. Just give us some ideas of what are some of the things that you're going to be looking at that may require some action on the behalf of Congress.
Yeah, well, there's a number of issues that have come up that at least at minimum require us to be monitoring and looking at. Some relate to ways we could create greater savings for the taxpayer, for Americans, without jeopardizing the quality of health care. Probably the one you've heard me talk the most about over the years would be something like allowing Medicare to bargain and negotiate with the drug companies, the pharmaceutical companies, for more affordable prices. We know this would be a significant savings for our seniors, but also would drive changes throughout the healthcare system. But there's a number of others. For example, there's been quite a debate about one of the taxes that fund the overall program relating to medical device companies. Now, on one side, you can argue that medical device companies are profiting from more people having health insurance, more demand for their products. On the other hand, when it was drafted, there was no distinction made between a company that had turned a profit and a company just starting out. And I think that was regrettable, and I think we ought to look at things like that. Now, one's a huge issue, the other affects a smaller number of companies, but still very important, especially to our local economy. And those are two just examples of what we ought to be looking at in order to strengthen it, improve it, and make it sustainable in the long run.
But they're both good examples, Senator, because they get to this issue of cost, and I think that's something that I don't know how we're going to finally measure that, but that's how a lot of people will decide whether or not this act is a success, is does it reduce the costs? And right now, I don't know that we can say that it has reduced. Maybe it's kept them a little better in check.
Yeah,
but
I think that's, you know, I don't know when we've seen the price of much go down. Okay, we saw a drop in gas prices recently, but it's pretty rare to see prices of things that there's high demand for going down. But we had seen these radical increases year after year in healthcare costs for individuals, for small businesses, for families. And with the Affordable Care Act, we have seen those really, on average, get in check, as you're saying. We certainly still see some outliers, but on average, this has really slowed the growth. It's still growing, but it's slowed the growth, and that's vital. And then we have to take the next steps. And, you know, there's so many really great, knowledgeable writers and experts who have such great suggestions for Congress and other policymakers to consider in terms of bringing down costs and stopping waste, stopping unnecessary health care that's being provided that doesn't actually help the patient. But we have to get beyond our squabbles and our fights over the Affordable Care Act before we can take these next very important steps. But that's really what we should be turning our attention to.
You know, interestingly, I've heard a lot of those suggestions come from Wisconsin healthcare professionals.
It's one of my joys as a U.S. Senator is I get to go to Washington, D.C. and say, let me tell you what we're doing in my home state at different locations that has really driving quality at the same time reining in price.
In this past week, there was also activity having to do with veterans in healthcare. We're going to talk about that when we come back, right after this with Senator Tammy Baldwin. My guest is United States Senator Tammy Baldwin, and we are talking about the Supreme Court decisions, but also a couple of bills that have been introduced recently. I want to talk about the Voting Rights Act in a bit, but first, a very bipartisan VA reform bill that you are a co-sponsor of,
Right.
the Opioid Act. Talk about that.
Yes,
bill.
well, very tragically, we had U.S. Marine veteran Jason Simkoski die at the Toma facility, and the death report said it was from mixed drug toxicity. I believe after a lot of investigation has occurred that there's an over-reliance by our VA on these powerful and very addictive drugs, and that we are finding that our veterans are getting hooked rather than getting the help that they need. And particularly after 2 decade-long wars with veterans returning with physical pain, physical illness, PTSD and other mental illnesses, we need to be able to assure that they are getting safe and effective treatment. So I drafted, and I'm just so delighted to have had the input from the Simkoski family, from Jason's family, as well as veteran service organizations, a bill to really help address this over-reliance, this over-prescribing problem by creating stricter guidelines for prescribers along with training and education, better tracking tools for VA to be able to see if there are red flags or warning signals, and also better patient advocacy. You know, Jason's family was very clear that they felt their voices weren't heard when they intervened to advocate for better care for their son. Mm-hmm. Jason had reported to his family that he didn't feel heard, and so improving the structure for patient advocacy is a real key piece of this. Important
step, I'm sure, but I mean, we have heard calls for replacing top officials. I mean, is this... What more needs to be done? This seems like a really serious issue, Senator.
It really is. And so let me talk about, you know, we just introduced this, this measure. It is trying to rather comprehensively deal with the overprescribing problem at the VA. But I think we learned in our state as things have unfolded and the strong work of some investigative journalists that there's other things that need to be done. We've had whistleblowers who step forward and at great risk and were not listened to. And so the need for whistleblower reforms is apparent, and we're working on those. We also, you know, each agency in the federal government has a watchdog. They're supposed to be looking for fraud and waste and abuse and reporting to their agency and the president, but also to Congress about what's going wrong. We saw some real weaknesses in the VA's Office of Inspector General, and I can report to you that it just happened that the acting Inspector General this week announced his resignation effective on the 4th of July. So we know there we will have an opportunity to see the president nominate a new leader, and hopefully with all the problems that we've seen recently, we can get stronger leadership, and you know, this is something I've been calling for a long time.
Is there a congressional confirmation process for that?
Yes, there is.
So
and frankly,
there would be some tough questions.
On the Homeland Security Committee on which I sit, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, we've had the Association of Inspectors General come before us many times, and we've been pressing them, please send names to the president of qualified individuals within your ranks to have him consider for nomination. And also, it's been a forum for us to raise issues we've had with lack of transparency, and we are advancing legislation, an amendment that I offered that will require greater transparency of the Inspector Generals when they have recommendations, when they have found something that needs addressing. Congress and the American public needs to know.
Yeah. Well, you've been busy. I mean, even just before you got here, I got a press release on the Voting Rights Act, which you have also introduced. That is a more partisan bill, which probably could be expected. But talk about
Actually, I disagree. I mean, at this point, it is sadly partisan. But the last time Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act, it was just incredible bipartisan majorities supporting
good point.
it.
I was thinking of the co-sponsors for this bill.
And the Voting Rights Act reauthorization since its initial passage have been overwhelmingly bipartisan actions in Congress. So it's disappointing in my mind to see that departure of late. And I'm certainly hoping that we will see it become much more bipartisan in both houses of Congress. But as we know, a couple sessions back, the U.S. Supreme Court weakened significant provisions of the Voting Rights Act. At the same time, across the United States, in numerous states, including our own, we have seen state legislatures and governors act to pass laws that serve to restrict access to the ballot box, and sometimes in ways that disproportionately impact communities within the states. And so whether it's low income, seniors, students, communities of color, these are greatly disturbing, and it's certainly high time we took a new look at strengthening our Voting Rights Act.
So we're talking about hours and early voting and voter ID, and does this bill address all of that?
Well, this is to address the Supreme Court case that weakened. It didn't repeal or overturn the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
But we always fear when the Supreme Court looks at something that they might weaken it. The Voting Rights Act, in many ways, was structured in a way that wouldn't be permanent to address, in some of its provisions, states that had a poor history in terms of denying the right to vote. And so they had different provisions than others. And so it certainly has been something that the Supreme Court has looked at over and over again. But I think when we see the actions that have been taken across this country right now to suppress the vote, to weaken access to the ballot box, that now is not the time to let up.
Well, when we come back, I want to talk about something that may affect more people than even know it yet, and that's overtime. We're going to do that right after this. I'm back with United States Senator Tammy Baldwin. I keep saying it was a big week. It was a big week. A lot happened.
It was a big week.
So President Obama announces changes in the overtime law. And the reason I said I'm not sure a lot of people know it is because I don't think it gets talked about a lot, that there was a wage threshold for overtime. It was, given inflation, and the last time it was changed, very, very low.
Yes.
It's been significantly raised. Explain what this means.
Well, first of all, just sort of how would it be experienced in our economy? This is probably primarily going to affect fast food and retail managers. So this is somebody who might have worked in a fast food restaurant, let's say, for a period of time. Their boss comes in and says, we're going to give you a promotion, you're going to be the manager here. And they switch from being a wage earner to being a salaried person, which means that after they work 40 hours a week, they're still on a fixed salary, so they don't get any recognition for the additional hours they might put in their new role as manager. But the hourly worker they supervise would get time and a half per every hour they worked overtime. What's happening in a lot of businesses is the manager actually ends up making less than the workers he or she supervises. Yep. So, you know, they come in, they open the shop, they do a lot of the same duties as the people they supervise, but they are also doing supervision and maybe training, hiring and firing. They close up at the end. We have had a lot of workers. These are, you know, again, low-paid managers who have really not kept up in this economy. And so this overtime rule really gives them hope and recognizes their work and recognizes that they are deserving of overtime when they work beyond 40 hours a week. And also recognizes, at least financially, the sacrifice they make in terms of time to spend with their family, their children, etc.
Now, this just happened this past week. I haven't seen a lot of response to it yet. I'm sure there are businesses in this state who will complain to you that it is a burden that they can't afford. How do you respond to that?
Well, you know, I would say a couple of things. One is, it's really wise when we make changes like this to link things to inflation so that we don't have these catch up after many, many years of inaction. We have the same issue with the minimum wage, which still to this day is not indexed to inflation. So we fall way behind, and then there's a huge cacophony of opposition because it's going to be a significant step up. So that's kind of lesson number one. But this is something that dates back many, many years to the Fair Labor Standards Act. And Congress and the administrations that have served prior have not kept pace with inflation. And this is basically a way to address that and to index it to inflation so we won't have this problem in the first place.
We only have about a minute and a half left.
Oh, no.
What haven't we talked about, Senator, that you're working on that is coming up next that we need to keep our eyes on? Well,
when I return next week, it looks like the U.S. Senate will take up the successor to No Child Left Behind. This would be the reauthorization of elementary and secondary education policy. And there's a lot that needs to be done. It's been neglected for many years. It's been mired in partisanship. What I'll tell you is hopeful to me. I sit on the Health Education Committee that has worked on this bill that's going to be taken up by the Senate. It got reported out of our committee on a 22-0 vote. We have an opportunity, I hope, to see the parties work together in the interests of the young people of this country. And I hope that follows through when we convene next week.
Always enjoyable, Senator. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Senator Tammy Baldwin and to you for joining us. We'll see you next Sunday on For the Record.